This is my channel's weekly compendium, ending Monday, April 10th, 2023. Case file number 1046, written by Owl Cries. The road trip with two wild mysteries. This is an unexplained phenomena from about 5 years ago. My partner and I took a road trip from Florida to North Carolina and decided to drive straight through. We stopped once or twice for gas, and the car was always monitored by one of us. We had 2 suitcases in the back seat. Mine was on the bottom. When we arrived in North Carolina, we both had the distinct feeling that there was no way 10 hours had passed. We both kept exclaiming that it felt like we went through a time portal, and we were confused at how quick the car ride felt. I remember actually trying to recount the audiobooks we listened to and piece together how it was possible that 10 hours had passed. Well, we arrive at the place we're renting out and put our suitcases in the room. While I'm in the shower, I hear my partner exclaiming and freaking out. I get out of the shower to see what it's about. He's crouching over the suitcase, utterly confused. The zipper is sealed shut with a plastic loop and 2 tiny metal keys, like the keys that come with a diary or perhaps a tiny lock on a brand new suitcase. There was no way to open the suitcase without breaking the plastic loop. He starts freaking out and asking the people in the house we were renting from if they were playing a trick on us. They look at us like we're crazy. Finally, we open the suitcase and all of my stuff is still in it. Okay, first of all, my suitcase was on the bottom of the 2 suitcases. Someone would have to get into our car while we weren't looking, and like I said, we never really left the car, to put this plastic loop with keys on it. And why would they choose the one on the bottom? And who would do this? This was an old suitcase I had used many times, so it's not like something I just never noticed was there. Second, even if it was sealing the zipper closed. And I had even grabbed a sweater out of my suitcase during the trip. This is a completely unexplainable mystery. Would you like even more content? Here's my Patreon. Now onto the stories. Case file number 1047, written by BMC25. Cut and paste this couple in pink. This is a recent story. I've managed to hopefully be able to articulate this as it was somewhat logistic based. I live close to an intersection of 2 main roads, Road A heading north and south and Road B heading west and east. I live on Road A. On the corner of this intersection is a collection of 3 small shops that share the same building. I live 2 driveways up from that, roughly 250 meters from the intersection. My sister lives off a service road of Road B, about 10 houses up, roughly 450 meters from the intersection. I know this is specific, but it is very relevant. It's about a 6-minute walk from my house to hers. The walk to the entrance of the service road would be about a 4 to 5 minute walk, not to mention there is a relative incline at the beginning of Road B. I had to run to my sister's house as she tends to borrow things without telling me and forgets to bring them back. I needed to grab my vacuum. I went to get in my car and remembered that it was a bin day. I proceed to grab my bin and begin walking it to the side of the road where at the very end of my driveway, there was a couple walking by, heading up my street, north, away from the intersection. A man in a green tracksuit, which I thought to be quite the look for a man of his age. The woman was in a similar pink tracksuit. They looked to be in their later years, I'd say late 60s. After a polite little back and forth, you go, no, you go, I allowed them to pass first. I rolled my bin to the curb and got in my car and pulled to the end of the driveway to do a loop through 2 back roads to avoid traffic lights and cars, etc. The old left and left again if you're in Australia. I have timed the trip to take approximately 1 minute and 25 seconds to make the car ride. I'd be happy to give it 2 minutes if it's busy, and I can't turn onto Road B immediately from the back road. However, it wasn't busy, as it was 11 a.m. on a Sunday. As I turned left out of my driveway, I saw the couple had proceeded maybe another 50 meters before crossing the street now, from the left side, which we were originally on, to the right side of the road, and stopped to look at some furniture that was on the street for hard rubbish collection. I proceed with my 1.5 minute drive to my sister's. When pulling into the service road, who do I see? The couple in their tracksuits are now heading towards my sister's house. Now I know it was them because again, I had to stop and let them pass as the service road is gravel and to avoid a large pothole, you need to drive slowly on the footpath. So I have a good 5 to 10 seconds of taking this all in before I can drive past them. I stop at my sister's driveway, very confused as I get out to open her gate. They walk past with no interaction at all. Even if it was possible that these people are marathon sprinters who were heading north and a minute later were heading west and uphill without breaking a single sweat in their 60s, covering a distance that even me as a 27-year-old female couldn't cover in that time, well, even then it wouldn't make sense. I had literally just interacted with them within minutes, and they acted like I was a stranger. I do know I am a stranger, but they acted not even slightly confused. It's just like they were literally copy and pasted, and I just can't work it out. I have gotten my sister to walk from the spot I last saw them towards her house from when I turned down the first side street, and she can't make it there before me without breaking into a sprint. So, to Mr. Green and his little wife, if you were Usain Bolt in disguise, you got me. If not, your programmer's messed up. Case file number 1048, written by Urkalan. The Canyon of Secrets, a hair-raising account of the unknown. This happened in the American Southwest to my parents while on vacation. They stopped at a spot along their travel route to get some food and got to talking to a young local who worked there. He told them about a box canyon that was on the way to their next stop. For those who don't know, a box canyon is characterized by being narrow, having high vertical walls and a flat bottom. To hear my mom tell it, he described the canyon with an almost spiritual reverence, saying that it was incredibly beautiful and had superb acoustics, and that he loved taking his guitar out there to play. My folks like doing stuff off the beaten path, so they decided to pay a visit. The canyon seemed to be quite isolated, with no buildings of any kind around it for miles. By the time they parked their car and made it to the canyon's entrance, the sun was just starting to go down. They said they seemed to be the only ones there, with no parked cars other than their own. They made their way into the canyon. After the fact, my parents have both said that they separately, without speaking of it, started to feel a touch of unease. Not totally unreasonable, as it was starting to get dark and the canyon walls pressed close on either side. Despite feeling this, they continued on until they heard the noise. My parents report the nature of this noise differently. When I ask them to describe it, their faces sort of scrunch up, like it's an effortful task, and they're still uncertain. My dad says it sounded like a person, possibly a man, speaking a low, single word that he didn't understand. My mom says that it didn't really sound like a word of any kind to her, just a strange, deep noise that rang out from somewhere nearby above them. It was accompanied by a brief, intense flash of pale light. Neither of them knew what it was or where precisely it had come from, but they were both immediately filled with dread and an overwhelming desperation to get the hell out of the canyon. They turned around and booked it back to their car. As they exited the dark closed space of the canyon, my mom describes feeling certain there was something chasing them and thinking that once they got to their car, they would find it sabotaged. That, thankfully, was not the case, and they were able to get in and speed away down the empty road. My mom said she didn't feel safe until they'd been driving for a while, still having the panicked but totally unsupported notion that they were being pursued. When they eventually spoke of it to one another, they weren't able to make any real sense of what had happened. Neither one of them really has a theory. This is probably pretty dull as far as spooky experiences go, but neither of my parents have a history of weird encounters or of telling tall tales, and so it strikes me to see them both get re-creeped out by the mere memory of this incident. I've asked my mom clarifying questions since. She said that the flash of light was actually quite close to them, mere feet away, and that it sort of seemed to hang in the air for a few moments. She had a hard time describing it very clearly. Case file number 1049, written by Amalthea the Unicorn. The Eerie Forest Metamorphosis. About 2.5 years ago, my mom got a puppy. When he was old enough and had had his shots, I started Googling local areas where we could take him. I found there was a forest with paths nearby that I hadn't been to before. We decided to give it a try, so we went there and it was nice, but very, very hilly, to the point it was even hard to get around as I'm disabled after having had a stroke. There were also a couple of field-type areas on the perimeter that were closed off with gates and not accessible to the public. I managed to squeeze through a gap in the gate and get into one. It was nice. Not long afterwards, we went back again. It was completely different this time. I know it was the same place as we went in through the same entrance with a big sign with the wood's name outside, but it was totally different inside. Those inaccessible closed-off fields were already gone. It was much less hilly, and there was now a totally different field open to the public with a walking path through it attached to the woods. The paths were different. It was just like a totally different place. I still go there regularly, and it hasn't changed back. It really weirds me out remembering what it was like the first time. It even has a really different atmosphere now. The subsequent times I went there were suddenly loads of houses all around the woods that hadn't been there before, where the fields had been the first time. Bonus file written by Red Krausen, New Orleans Terror. This story may be hard to believe, especially since I don't have the photo at hand, but I promise I'm telling you the truth. When I was a kid, I went on a church service trip to New Orleans. Our aim was to help clean up remaining damages from when Katrina hit. About midway into the trip, we helped remove brush and debris from some plot of land so a playground could be built. We were all ecstatic because the day was incredibly productive and we really believed that the spiritual forces of good and godliness were at work through us. That night, we visited Bourbon Street to have dinner, listen to some live music, and celebrate the work that had been done. At some point, one of the church leaders was taking pictures and pointed her camera to the sky, facing a distant casino. The sky was clear, no clouds. She snapped a photo, and when the screen displayed her photo, there was a silver-looking face smiling heinously while clasping his hands and protecting the casino. His face seemed metallic with many wrinkles. If you can imagine Heath Ledger Joker, but without eyes, a huge mouth, no teeth, and many wrinkles, like fabric being pulled in multiple directions, that's what it looked like. It had wet-looking orange hair that draped around midway down its face. Its nose was half missing. The entire group went hysterical when they all looked at the photo, and the rest of the night we were disturbed. The joy we had felt all day instantly went away. Few of us slept. I had a variety of hallucinations in the dark, of demons falling into me. I didn't get any sleep. There were a few girls in the room next to me who I could hear crying in terror about what had taken place. I say all this to illustrate how the incident felt like a direct, successful attempt to hijack our spirits of positive energy. One person in the group tried to come up with multiple natural explanations for the incident, but the leader who took the photo always had new details to explain how there wasn't a natural explanation for what had taken place. This incident alone has been enough to keep my agnostic butt alert and aware of all possibilities. Case file number 1050, written by Infamous Benefit 7825. The unsettling story of how I predicted two tragic events. I was just reminded of this and actually freaked my wife out last week, and it's the second time this has happened to me. I have at least twice now seen news articles about major disasters the day before it happened. The first one being a flight MH17. I saw an article that the flight had gone down, then mentioned it to a coworker. The next day it actually happened. It honestly didn't freak him out. It reinforced his conspiracy beliefs that the government plans and executes disasters. As far as I'm aware, the second time this has happened was with the second Norfolk Southern train derailment in Ohio. The day before it happened, I told my wife, "Oh my god, another one derailed in Ohio." Then the next day it actually did happen, and now my wife is freaked out. I'm leaning towards glitch. Both sites I saw the articles on were reputable sources. I could believe the government caused these things to happen for one reason or another, but having prepared news posts for the event and preventing any journalist or government employees from blowing the whistle, I don't think that's possible. Case file number 1051, written by Artistic Feeling 826. Ghosts, Glitches, and Fog. The Unforgettable Road Trip. Confusing day trip. I'll start this by saying my mom and I are superstitious, and we believe in the paranormal and weird stuff, or things such as glitches. This happened to us yesterday, and we've told a few people, and they all think it's extremely weird and it isn't possible. My mom and I were coming back from New York. We were on the highway, and we're going to take the Mansfield exit to go through town. All of a sudden, after a weird fog that lasted maybe 10 seconds, we're on this long as hell road we don't recognize, and the next exit is Sebring. Sebring is 18 minutes away from Mansfield. Sebring is also an exit coming back from the opposite way, which is further into Pennsylvania and nowhere near the New York border. We came up on the Sebring exit as if we were headed back from the opposite side of the state. We're both trying to put it together, and the last time we remember seeing was 4:20, of course, and we were never conscious of the time until it was 6:20. A few minutes after we got off at Sebring, we got off at the Elkland exit, one of the first exits right outside of New York, before we got back on the highway towards the Mansfield exit when we went through the thick fog. I remember it because I said, "Holy crap," when I saw how thick it was. That's what she said. But our conclusion is that the fog did something to cause a glitch, and now we're just confused and missing an entire hour of our lives. To put it into perspective even further, coming back from New York, you almost immediately hit the Elkland exit. We got off there to go to a store, and we got back onto the highway so we could get off at the Mansfield exit, which is a little after the Elkland exit. In order to get to the Sebring exit, we would have had to pass 3 town exits. As I said, Sebring is 18 minutes away from Mansfield, and there is no way we could have gotten there in the span of 5 minutes. We came to the exit as if we were going back to Mansfield and Elkland. That's just impossible. We stayed on the highway, didn't make any turns or anything. It's just something really weird. Case file number 1052, written by Aiko Zakwork. The Parking Ticket Paradox. Pre-pandemic, I traveled downtown roughly twice per week to attend technical user group events. My employer would reimburse me for parking ramp expenses, so I'd always use the nearest parking ramps available. Years ago, I had the unfortunate experience of losing a parking ticket and having to pay the full daily rate, expensive, to exit the ramp. Needless to say, it's always stuck with me, and since, I've made it a habit to always place my ramp ticket in the same place each time before exiting my vehicle, in the center console cup holders. On this particular occasion, I recalled the lost ticket, thought to myself, yep, don't want to ever go through that again, and placed the ticket into my empty cup holder. Mind you, I keep my vehicles pretty pristine, no garbage, nothing really in my car other than my sunglasses. The event ends and I head back to the car, put it in reverse and drive up to the meter to pay. Look down to grab my ticket, and it's just gone. Not there. Nothing is in my cup holder. I take a few seconds to look around, but there's nothing. By this time, people are piling up behind me. Everyone had to back up so that I could maneuver out. I pulled around and found a spot in the ramp so that I could figure out where my ticket was. Of course, it's going to be on the floor somewhere between the seat and the center console. Nope. Other side? Nope. Under the seats, purse? Nope. I know where I put it, but oddly it's just not there, and I'm starting to second guess myself. Maybe someone got in my car and took it along with other items from the center console? Nope, nothing was missing and my car was locked. So this went on for a good 10 minutes. Finally, I start screaming to the parking ticket gods and forcefully feel around my cup holder and proceed to lift up the bottom rubber mat to see if it somehow fell under or got caught in a crease. I mean, it's empty. No physical way it could have fallen in a crease because there wasn't one. It's a solid molded piece of plastic. I put the rubber mat back down and tap it in place. Defeated and wanting to give the universe a big double finger, I grab my seatbelt and proceed to buckle in for the grand payment. Look one last time at that damn cup holder, and the fucking ticket is sitting there dead center, pristine, like it's never moved, no creases, on top of that rubber mat I just tamped down. This is a 4-inch by 2-inch green ticket. What the fuck? That rocked me. I have no explanation. Case file number 1053, written by Humble Acanthicita 28. Beyond the Veil. The unexplainable mysteries of life, death, corn, and lightning. I have for sure died twice, quite possibly 4 times. Of the 2, I'm very confident in the first one. It happened at about 1998, and the other one in 2018 or so. In the first instance, my best friend and I were driving on gravel back roads in the middle of the night, 40 miles between towns in rural South Dakota. I was admittedly going far too fast, and we came over a small rise. There was a T in the road where you could turn left or right, but straight forward was a driveway to a farmhouse. The driveway went for about a half block or so, and then transitioned into a cornfield. I remember saying, "Oh fluck," and starting to slow down as we started flying through the very tall corn. It was late summer, and the corn stalks were basically full grown. The sound as my car plowed over the corn stalks and into the field sounded like the most vicious hailstorm ever. The experience was completely overwhelming to the senses. The sights and sounds of flying headlong at high speeds into a fully grown, densely planted cornfield cannot be overstated. This is where things get weird. The next thing I remember was sitting at a stop sign where we would turn into the main highway in the area. It was nearly completely silent, with only the light hum of the engine creating any sound. This was at least several miles away from the field we had just flown into. My blinker was on, to the left, and the car was just sitting still with my foot on the brakes. The lack of motion and dead silence was, for reasons unknown, also absolutely overwhelming. I felt extremely disoriented and discombobulated, and was honestly not certain how I had come to this point, and was even concerned that perhaps I had blacked out or something. I was just not certain how we had arrived where we were currently sitting. At this point, I did not remember flying through that intersection or crashing through the cornfield. That memory was gone, either blocked or unremembered. I looked over at my friend and again said, "What the fluck?" He had a dumbfounded look on his face as well and shrugged his shoulders, and after a moment said, "I think we go left?" I actually got out of the car and found the northern star to make sure we would be turning in the correct direction onto the highway. I also surveyed the situation, grasping for some semblance of understanding. We were surprisingly close to the town I lived in at the time. In short order, we made it to my apartment and both crashed as it was 4 in the morning, and we had had a very long day. I was dead sober for this entire experience, but I did not feel right and knew something was amiss. We got up the next day about mid-morning and got back in my car to drive to my friend's town where he was attending college, which was going to be about a 5-hour drive. We needed gas, and I stopped at a station to fill up and get other miscellaneous supplies. The car I was driving at the time was old enough to be using a bit of oil, so I almost always checked the oil. Again, at this moment, my memories of the cornfield and all of that were completely gone. I popped the hood and went around to the front of the car to get at the engine. I lifted the hood and glanced down. I have never been so absolutely baffled and immediately enlightened at the same time. A light breeze would have knocked me over. The engine compartment was almost completely chock full of corn stalks. My knees went weak and I became very, very heady, and I felt my brain perform several full spins. Once again, I very loudly and firmly proclaimed, "What the fluck?" and called my friend so he would come around to the front of the car too. The very instant I saw the corn stalks in the engine compartment, the entire accident flashed back to me. I don't remember the point of death, but I remember all the other details, including being very confused, sitting at the stop sign by the highway, and the brutal contrast between flying through the field and sitting still at the stop sign. My friend said to me, "Do you remember?" I said, "Yeah." We talked it over multiple times during our long drive, and we had the exact same memories. His memory also returned to him the second he saw the corn in the car as well. A couple months later, I tried to drive the same back roads that we had been driving to find that intersection in the farmhouse and the driveway, and the cornfield too, of course. There were a couple of very unique, specific details to the location where the accident happened that should have made it very easy to recognize and find. But I was never able to locate a spot like this on any of the roads anywhere around where we would have been driving. Microsoft had also just released their satellite imagery, and I scoured everywhere between those two cities, and I have never been able to find the location where we had our accident. I honestly don't think it exists on this timeline. The other incident, I was out in the middle of the night again, in a very rural area during a thunderstorm, to take lightning photos. I'm pretty sure that I saw the lightning bolt that killed me prior to my timeline jump. I remember sitting in the car and finishing my styrofoam cup of gas station coffee, and hopping out of the car to smoke a cigarette and go pee on the gravel road. Most of the lightning was several miles to the west, and it wasn't even actually raining where I was parked. I was not worried about lightning safety at this point. Now, the very large power lines that take electricity to the town I was living in were right by this road. I've been pretty close to a couple of lightning strikes. I'm no stranger. I remember getting that very powerful, static feeling, and the hair on my head and arms started to stand up. I knew what was coming. I started to say, "Oh, fuck." I reached for the door handle, and before I could even get my profanity out, I remember a profoundly huge snap sound and a blinding white light. The next thing I remember was sitting in my parked car with my nearly full cup of coffee in my hand. I remember thinking that I wanted to smoke a cigarette and I needed to go pee, so I chugged the lukewarm coffee and started to get out of the car. The second my feet hit the ground, I felt the most massive wave of déjà vu I have ever experienced. I nervously glanced up besides the road to look at the power lines, but the spot I had stopped previously was about a mile down the road, and the power lines had turned a corner and not followed the road down to this point. I glanced down the road to what I thought was a spot I had previously been in, and just as I looked down the road, lightning struck the power line in multiple massive flashes, and I even saw the lightning bolt jump down to the ground under the power line. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I witnessed the very lightning bolt that killed me. I have a couple of other experiences where I'm pretty sure I died, but the situations were ambiguous enough that I'm not certain. So you are not alone. By the number of people who have had confusing, odd experiences where things are not quite as they seem, there have been many people delighted to finally gain the proper word to label their experience: quantum immortality. Case file number 1054, written by Fullbeat 6784. When a Ring Goes Rogue, a story of salt and mystery. Hello. A lot of my glitch stories are from quite a long time ago, and I don't want to risk misremembering or misrepresenting anything. This one happened very recently though. I have this gold ring I got about 8 years ago. It's a thin little scalloped rose gold band that is easy to wear and that I absolutely adore and that I never ever remove. In the 8 years of having it, I've removed it twice, once when I had an MRI in 2021 and the same week again when I had surgery, and every single piece of jewelry had to be removed for the procedures. Afterwards, I stopped wearing all of my other jewelry, like the many layered necklaces I used to keep around. It was just this one ring, and one little blue stud I wear on my right ear. Seriously, the second I was out of surgery, I was asking for my ring back because it comforts me to have it on. Now, as has happened to a few people during the pandemic and lockdown, I gained a bit of weight. Not so much that I had to remove the ring altogether, but enough that I would have to scrub with a decent amount of soap and warm water to pry it off. All that to say is that this ring stays on very snugly. Last month, I went on a trip with my friends to Mexico, and I had quite a few drinks one night, and I came back home to take a nice long soapy shower. A few days later, when I got home, I realized that my ring was missing. I was quite upset about it, since I love it, but I couldn't do much because I assumed it had fallen off when I had been scrubbing the day off of me in the shower I took. So fine, nothing to do, not until the next time I head back to the same exact spot in Mexico and ask the nice Airbnb owner to let me search the shower, right? A couple of days ago, I was making dinner at my parents' house, not even my house, and when I cook, I always use a special fancy salt that I love because I'm pretentious like that, but we had completely run out. I asked my mom where her table salt was, and she, also someone who never uses it, wasn't sure, so she said just to hunt around the cabinets. I found an almost finished container of salt at the back of the pantry, one that has tiny salt holes in it unless you screw the entire top off, and the top had probably only been taken off once, long ago when it was first bought, to remove that layer of foam and paper that protects the opening. I went to go salt something, and guess what I found sitting inside the box? I have never once touched that box of salt, never opened it, always use my salt. There isn't even a hole big enough in it for the ring to get inside. Even if I had been the one to open the salt for the first time, it would have to have been months and months ago because the container is almost finished, and I don't usually cook at my parents' place. Plus, I was still wearing the ring as recently as late February. I have no idea how this happened, and it's just been sitting with me and making me laugh since it happened. Luckily, this wasn't a scary glitch, but it feels odd to think that I may have just lost a moment of time somewhere or somehow. This is why the story sticks out so much to me, because I don't reach for anything else. I really love this particular grinder. I keep this with the pepper grinder right next to the stove at my parents' house and would have no reason to pick a very old-looking bottle of salt that I didn't even know the location of. The only other salt I use is Morton's, if I have to use heaps to salt pasta water, or stocks or broth, and that has a tiny little metal nozzle and no discernible way to even open it except the metal nozzle. Okay, I guess this ring in the salt jar actually perturbed me a little bit more than I originally released. It's inexplicable. Bonus file, written by Cheese and Crackers 84, the day my dead grandma protected me from a violent burglary. When I was 17, 26 now, we were burgled in broad daylight while I was at home. The robbers were armed and violent. However, nothing about that day makes any sense at all. I've been trying to work it out for the past 9 years, and the only conclusion I can draw is my dead grandma was keeping me safe. Some context. Around that time in my life, I was struggling a lot with insomnia, to the point where I needed sleeping pills to ever be able to sleep. I hadn't slept without them in about 2 years. That particular day, I arrived home from school at around 4 p.m., went into my bedroom. My bedroom was on the ground floor at the back of the house. You had to fully walk into the kitchen to even notice my bedroom door. I sat on the bed and suddenly was overcome with this deep tiredness like nothing I'd experienced in a long time. I put my head down and fell into the deepest nap I think I've ever had, with no help from sleeping pills or anything like that. Whilst I was napping, I had a very vivid dream about my grandma, who had died 2 years prior. In the dream, she was in the room with me. Her presence was so strong I could almost reach out to her. Suddenly, my phone went off and woke me up. It was my auntie, who had just come home to find the front door battered open, and the upstairs of the house and the downstairs living room and hallway had been totally turned upside down. She called as she assumed I wasn't home. She hadn't checked my bedroom. I was super disoriented when she called me, and I thought I had been asleep for hours and hours. I felt almost drunk. I was that disoriented. When I finally realized what had happened, it was only 4:20 p.m., which means somehow, in the span of 20 minutes, I managed to come home, fall into the deepest sleep of my life, and somehow not hear a single thing while the house got totally ransacked. They must have left in a hurry because they didn't check the kitchen. If they had, they would have immediately noticed my room. The next door neighbors then came over and told us they'd heard banging and crashing around. Nobody could understand how I'd been there and not woken up. It didn't and still doesn't make sense. I've always been a super light sleeper, and even if somebody tiptoes into a room, I'll immediately sense it and wake up. Unfortunately, this meant that everybody was slightly suspicious of me for a while, as it made no sense at all. But I swear to God, no matter how many times I play it over in my head, the only conclusion I can draw is that my grandma was protecting me. The burglars were later found, and it turned out they were wanted for a series of violent robberies. They had been armed with weapons and everything. When I found that out, my stomach turned. I truly believe that my deceased grandma saved my life that day. Case notes for file 1046. The road trip with 2 wild mysteries. Well, this is a full glitch, and not one I have an easy answer for. Could it be aliens abducted you, then locked your suitcase? Obviously, that makes no sense, but nothing really does. It's just baffling indeed. The time anomaly alone is freaky enough, but how can you explain the suitcase lock too? You opened it while on the trip, so it couldn't have been someone pranking you before you left, or during it because you say you were always with the car. No one could have broken into your trunk and then locked it for some reason without stealing anything. What would possibly be the point of that? And the anomaly you both felt, having traveled the distance in shorter time than you expected, is it related to the suitcase? Was there some presence involved? Maybe not aliens, but I don't know what it would be, honestly. Weird glitch, but very interesting. Case notes for file 1047. Cut and paste this couple in pink. Sometimes I wonder about these duplicate human sighting events. Sure, it could be versions of a parallel world, but maybe it's even simpler than that. As you say, cut, copy, and paste. From the server managers, you could say. An extra copy of NPCs that were needed in that exact moment for some reason. Maybe even unrelated to you. Maybe just an extra layer to the whole universe. What we perceive as glitches happening doesn't necessarily have anything to do with us. We just are the ones that are seeing it happen. And now time for the quote of the day. Once you start questioning your beliefs, that's when it's all over. It truly is doubt that kills our conviction. Hiram Yeakley. Conviction is an important word to have in your lexicon. And this doesn't mean that you can't entertain other ideas. I think that's critical. If you want to bolster your own ideas and reach what is actually the objective truth of any given situation, you have to give yourself both conviction and understanding of opposite views. It's the toughest thing to balance because you don't want self-doubt, but you also don't want to be arrogant. So how to balance those things together is one of the great questions of life. Case notes are file 1048, The Canyon of Secrets, a hair-raising account of the unknown. You know, the whole time reading this story, I was thinking of that movie, I think it's 128 Hours, where this spelunker canyon explorer just hiking along, I think he's on the surface, but then he falls into a ravine and he's trapped there. He has to survive for 100 some hours, like not a week, but moving on a week, 4 days or something. Of course, he only has a tiny amount of water, no food, or like a couple bars or something. And it's just interesting what happens when you're all alone and isolated from the rest of the world. There's things out there that aren't meant to be known, or at least to know them is going to be difficult and challenging and dangerous. The light you saw, coupled with the noise, was it just a person that had a deep, gruff voice, maybe someone that was native to the area and they had a flashlight? And I could see the presence that your wife felt, being related to that. You were pursued and hunted, but it was just a human being native to that environment, protecting their environment. But if it was supernatural in nature, probably a skinwalker is more likely. Case notes file 1049. The Eerie Forest Metamorphosis. This is a hard one to place. Could it be time peering? You were seeing into a past before things were developed? But it's hard to square that one too, because there were still those guardrails, those barriers that you said preventing you from going past where people aren't supposed to go. If you were peering in the past, they wouldn't be there, because you're talking about even the hills, the format of the land itself changing. You'd have to go back hundreds of thousands of years probably for that to alter the landscape itself, especially in the elevation of it. So if it wasn't time slipped, could it be multiversal peering? But that is also tricky because, again, the alteration of the land itself, it should require so much time. It's such a massive difference. Maybe there was development going on in a parallel universe. And actually, no, scrap that. It would be the first time you went was when you were multiversal peering into an area where there was no development at all. You were just seeing basically the raw landscape with the hills and everything. And then you stopped multiversal peering the next time you went back, and you just saw the developed land with houses nearby and the hills flattened out and all that. That makes sense to me. Case notes for the bonus file. New Orleans Terror. This is very kind of you trying to directly help natural disaster victims. Seeing a lot of that now with the Ohio train derailment and all the chemicals leaking out or being burned into the atmosphere. Whoa, Dave is freaking out from that. He doesn't want to breathe it in. But yeah, it's very kind of you. The best of humanity, curiously and oddly, comes out when disaster strikes. You see that with the Katrina, hurricane floodings, all kind of tornado victims, whatever it is. We tend to bolster together, galvanize whenever it's almost like red blood cells coagulating around a wound when there's a strike. Ordinarily they don't really talk to each other that much, but when needed, when there's a great need, they come together. We're kind of similar to red blood cells. Neat. As far as the story, I think positivity grates on evil forces. It's like Dementors in Harry Potter. They want to suck all the positivity out, but it's even worse than that for them, because they feed on positive vibes. I think most evil is actually repulsed by it. It's almost like magnetism. They can't get near it. It's a repulsion effect. Their will requires negativity. Anything positive, like helping those affected by a disaster, is akin to hearing someone scratch their nails on a chalkboard. It's just, they can't tolerate it at all. It gets at you all the way deep inside your soul, or if they don't have a soul, their essence, I guess. As far as New Orleans go, I've heard from people who live there that it's a city of polar extremes. There's a great sense of good and will and strength, but also a lot of evil and intense negativity. Great divide, divergence. It's a place I would like to visit. I've never been there, but I don't think I'd want to live there. And now time for the quote of the day. There is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. J.R.R. Tolkien. How relevant, right? The good in this world is us. We are the light that shines, or the mass that obscures the light. And we get to make that choice. That's the great thing about life. We decide if we're good or bad. No one else can make that choice for you, and they can try to influence it, but ultimately it's our choice to make. What are you going to choose? Case notes for file 1050. The unsettling story of how I predicted 2 tragic events. So, government-planned events is quite a deep rabbit hole to go down. There's so many theories, the Twin Towers and the moon landing. We live in a firmament, the whole world's shape is a lie. There's so many categories to go down. I don't know which ones are true or not. I'm happy to entertain them, though. It's very interesting and fun to think about. Won't go down that road in this video, though. What I think would be wise from now on whenever you're reading articles related to disasters is looking at the timestamp. Usually they list them when they're published, and even screenshot or archive it, so you'll know if there's any time manipulation going on. Now, the people in your life realize that you saw it beforehand, so I guess it wouldn't be time related, but it's still good to have an archive of these articles, because it sounds like it happens frequently enough to you that it's worth paying attention to, let's say. I'm curious really how this is happening, because if the articles really are published beforehand, you're talking to your wife and your coworker about it, it can't be time manipulation, because if it was, they wouldn't remember. So everyone is remembering. It's kind of like in the news broadcast where they were talking about the towers falling before they even fell. It's very curious. Is it just evidence that they do indeed know these events are happening? But why have journalists publish it earlier? I mean, doesn't that just give away the game? It's very odd. Unless there is alternate universe crossovers going on where you're seeing a different universe where it already happened earlier in that universe and then you're just blinking over here. I don't know. I guess that could be a possibility. Outside of that, I'm not sure. It's certainly a useful power to have. If only you could control it. You'd be Nicolas Cage in Next, who somehow still didn't see the nuclear bomb exploding. Case file number 1051. Ghost Glitches and Fog. The Unforgettable Road Trip. So your point about the fog causing this glitch, I think it's related. There's a lot of stories that involve fog. Obviously, there's also fictional stories like The Mist, which is one of my favorite movies. I haven't read the book. I hear it's pretty good. I don't know if The Mist itself is causal, or if it's a manifestation of these weird anomalies coming in. Or are these entities using the fog as cover? It makes sense if there's strange beasts or entities that can manifest fog that they would do so, because it gives them... It's almost like a smoke grenade, like Batman will launch his smoke to dip out if he needs to, or to even go into an area. You obscure the line of vision of people so they don't know what's going on. It makes perfect sense in that regard. If you're going to pull off any sort of shenanigans, you're going to want to have cover from other people's line of sight. So that all fits to me. But in terms of the anomaly itself, it's probably just a space-time warping, which does happen often and doesn't necessarily involve fog. So I don't know if in this case it's related. I think in general, often it is, but in this case, it's just weird coincidence. Well, I really would like to see that kind of thick fog. There's some here in North Carolina. When I'm out walking at night, it's kind of cool. It sets in just as I'm going out for a walk at like 8 or 9 p.m. Very atmospheric. Case notes for file 1052. The Parking Ticket Paradox. So this could be DOP. I think it may be a prankster spirit, though. Could be attached to you. There's quite a few of them around, I expect. I mean, they're just bored, if you ask me. The more unsettling idea is that it's a server manager that is just pranking you. So it's not a spirit, it's an actual manager, a real human being in the real world. Well, if we're human beings in the real world, maybe in the real world we're like tentacle aliens with 8 limbs, and we look more like squids or something with 8 spider eyes. I don't know about that. I hope not. I hope we're humanoids. Or, I was thinking too, if God does exist, how, in whatever manifestation, whatever religion, if God exists in one sense or another, server manager God, I'm sure he would like to prank his creation sometimes. I mean, wouldn't you if you were God? Not maliciously, but just for fun. In situations like this, make them think that they're going crazy because the ticket that they know they have isn't there, and then it just reappears. I would certainly do that. And a bit more. What would be the most devious prank? Probably switching out yogurt for mayonnaise would be one of those. I may or may not have done that at some point. And now time for the quote of the day. We accept the love we think we deserve. Stephen Chbosky. Isn't that true? Especially the friends you keep around, they're a reflection of how you think about yourself and how much you value yourself. It's one of those lines from Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, where Han speaks to this point. The friends you keep speak to a reflection of yourself and how you value yourself. If the friends around you are all negative and they never seek to improve themselves and, if they're just not a positive force to be around, they're like an anchor that you place on your own ankle and then you go jump in the ocean with them. It's not going to end well for anyone. And you can't really save people unless they want to be saved. Remember that. I hope people will learn to accept that they deserve quite a bit of love if they're good people. And most people are, deep down. Just have to choose to be. Case notes are file 1053. So I think you were affected by quantum immortality, but there's more to it. Given those cornstalks were within the engine compartment of the car itself, it means that the car actually did crash through the stalks, even if you're in a different universe. So the memory of it was suppressed, it happened within the confines of that original universe, and then you manifested into a different universe via quantum immortality, but you also crashed through the cornstalk field in that universe and just didn't remember it. The host bodies in that universe didn't remember it. But of course the physical evidence was in the car engine compartment, so you can't ignore that. Makes me wonder what happened after. Because you say that was a T intersection, you went through the cornfield, and then you were at the highway entry point? So I guess maybe after the cornfield, the car crashed through it. But then if you died, the car would have been damaged. So I don't know, maybe the first one actually wasn't quantum immortality. Because the cornstalk shouldn't be there if it was. Something else may have happened in that universe. Maybe it was a time reset. And it couldn't be a time reset either, because the cornstalks are still there. The corn is the key, and it doesn't lie. It changes the whole game. Now the second story though, where the lightning strikes you, that I do believe entirely to be quantum immortality. I think you actually did die, and then you were in a different universe where before it actually happened, you were just in a different spot in that universe, and you were able to see it from afar. That's trippy. There's quite a few videos now going around where lightning is striking the same spot multiple times, which it does actually happen. I don't know where this idea that lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, that's nonsense. Actually, it's more likely to strike the same place. Dave, come on. Don't be afraid of lightning. So yeah, the second one I fully agree is quantum immortality. The first one, I don't really know what it is. And if you don't know, if you do sense the feeling of static in the air, the charge, like you're going to be struck by lightning, then the best bet is to get down on the ground, spread yourself out in a straight line, and hug your feet together. Not always, but it could sever the connection, the link, because lightning is actually a link between the clouds and the ground. Often it actually starts from the ground, which is why you feel the static charge build up from the ground first. So if you can ground yourself, it may be less likely to use you as a conduit, basically. Because the human body is actually very resistant to electricity. Human skin, anyways, unless there's water. And now, time for the quote of the day. If you don't build your own dream, someone else will hire you to build theirs. Tony Gaskin Jr. Wow, when I first heard this quote, I was just thinking, that's my own story. Before I was working for someone else. And I mean, most people do. I think as a stepping stone, it makes sense. And maybe some people really do just want the quiet, comfortable, predictable life that working for someone entails. Just get a normal job, work for 40 years, retire. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's still a good idea to have side projects, even if that's what you're doing, and know what your dream is. Maybe your dream is just the quiet life and, have a family, white picket fence, all that good stuff. But I think some people, they don't manifest their dreams because they're too afraid to take the plunge and try. Don't necessarily copy what I did. I was crazy. If you have dreams, know your dreams first and pursue them. It's worth doing. You won't regret it in the end, even if it fails. You only regret not trying. Case notes for file 1054. When a ring goes rogue. A story of salt and mystery. Curious that it would be salt. It's like the universe is trying to tell you that it was a glitch baked from within, as spirits wouldn't be able to interact with salt. Why place it in there otherwise? It kind of proves that it wasn't a spirit that did this. It was the universe. It can't be random either. It's just too damn specific. It has to be whoever is in charge of the universe, God, the simulation masters, whoever it is, they're doing this for some reason. They took the ring, or the ring was accidentally misplaced by the universe, and they figured, well, we have to return it. We'll just do it in a way where they think that maybe it was an accident on their part. Although, even there, it's a bit loose. Why not just put it back in your own home, where you would expect that, oh, okay, maybe I just didn't take it with me to Mexico, or something like that. So I'm not sure on the reason. I just know my gut tells me this cannot be random, and it can't be spirits, because of the salt. Case notes for the bonus file. The day my dead grandma protected me from a violent burglary. Can loved ones' spiritual fragments linger behind? For various reasons, absolutely. We know that. I don't think they're able to physically fight the intruders off. I think more likely what happened is that those violent intruders didn't start just ransacking the place themselves. Why would they do that? I mean, yeah, maybe they'll move things out of the way, try to determine if there's any hiding spots, like there's a secret cache of gold and silver under the floor or something. But they would try to be somewhat quiet. I mean, unless they're absolutely stupid. Which maybe they were, but I'm gonna assume that they're just normal intellect, and from that, my gut tells me here that your grandma was the one that actually moved things around and made a whole ruckus about it. So it would both alert the neighbors, the noise, and also spook the burglars terrifyingly. They're just breaking into a place looking to rob it, and then everything starts flying all over the place and things are breaking from your grandma's actions. It would freak them out. And yeah, the robbers were later caught, you mentioned that, but I don't think that means that they would spill the beans on it, try to claim the insanity plea by saying that the house they robbed was damaged by a ghost. They would just keep their mouth shut on that. And they may not even believe it happened themselves, even though they saw it. That's what I think happened. So yes, your grandma did protect you. And that's beautiful. Now time for the quote of the day. The greatest mistake you can ever make is being too afraid to make one. Being paralyzed by fear of failure. That's what this comes back to. And a lot of people are affected by that, sadly. It's hard to blame them. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong. It's Murphy's Law, right? But even though things will probably go wrong at some point in some way, the whole point of trying and success is not to avoid failure, it's to persevere in spite of failure. Until eventually you succeed, or maybe you don't. But you still challenge yourself and you're better off for it. It's like in a MMORPG where you're going out and adventuring. It's not just for the destination or the loot, but also for the experience. You're literally leveling up yourself by just trying. So don't be afraid of failure. And also know that failure is inevitable. It's that one TNG episode where Picard is telling Data where he can't beat this intelligent but ordinary mortal, and because of that he thinks that there's a problem in his code, but in reality it's just that sometimes it's possible to make no mistakes and still fail. Isn't that a concept? There's just no winning move. That is sometimes the case, like the war games, curious game you have here, the only winning move is not to play. Of course, in this case, do play, because not winning isn't necessarily the point. I think that's the best summary.